Right, good evening, folks. Countrymen's Diary. I hate technology. It's getting worse, isn't it, Simon? Right, for tonight's podcast, there's nothing to show, but I've got something for folks to listen to.
Death with the horse, blue or ghost.
Yes. Now, for most of our listeners, they'll know exactly what that music means. It's Sunday evening, and it's probably Channel 4 around 1981, give or take a few years. And it means it's the very late, great Jack Hargreaves with either Old Country or Out of Town. And our guest tonight is none other than his stepson. I give you Mr. Baddeley. Good evening, Simon.
Evening, Greg. It's lovely to see you and to hear you.
And you, sir. It feels like we've known each other for a lot longer than we have for some reason. Right, could you introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Well, I'm living in Birmingham, in Handsworth, for a little bit longer, where I've lived here for 45 years. And I'm a town and countryman, so I also live in the country as well. And I first met Jack in 1948 when I was 6, and he came to live with my mum at our house, at the two-floor flat in Battersea. And I first saw him because it was Christmas Eve, which is a time I could never get to sleep. I still can't. And I crept up the stairs from our basement bedroom. Sounds a bit grim, but very nice. Warm bedroom in London's winter. I looked through the door of the sitting room and I could see a man standing rather to attention, as I remember it, by the Christmas tree, talking to my mum, who was out of picture. And that's the first sight I had of Jack. And as I think you know, because I've said it so many times on our Facebook page, Out of Town with Jack Hargreaves, but he and my mum brought me up. I did get to meet my dad in later life. He's a lovely man, died far too early, and he introduced me to grief. But that sense is separate from the fact that I have enormous respect and love for my dad, but Jack was the man who was really my father and brought me up, he and my mum.
I do. Now, I know a lot of people thought as soon as they see Jack, it's the white whiskers, the hair, the glasses, the pipe. Did he look like that in 1948, or was he a bit more dashing?
He did have a beard. He would be saying in later life, I'm not going to wear a beard until I hit 60. And in all the sort of studio still photographs of him before he was 60, no beard. But I think I picked up the fact that he had some sort of a rash on his chin. I don't think I've ever mentioned that before, as I remember it. And his GP said, just stop shaving. So he did. And so for a short while in that part of my life that I can hardly remember, Jack had a black beard that hid his chin. But for most of my growing up, he didn't have a beard.
Interesting. Probably like early shaving rash off the soaps or the old razor blades or something.
I think it was something like that. And certainly the earlier photographs of him when he was in the army, and one or two other pictures because he was involved with radio before the beginning of the war, made quite a reputation. He was without a beard. But I suspect that beard was not something he particularly chose. It was just prescribed by the doctor.
I don't think today's modern doctors would prescribe facial hair, do you?
I think he said it was the one way to stop the rash. Such a sort of tiny tail. And as I say, I think I've not mentioned it before. I think I've got one picture of Jack with a beard in an office somewhere, and he's rubbing noses in the office with a poodle. I have posted it somewhere.
Did he always smoke a pipe?
Because he hated the idea of being sloppy with dogs. You know, he believed dogs should be not in the house, certainly not on the bed, as they always were in the house. He said, live out of doors, in a warm, protected stable. He never was able to impose that on us.
No. Some dogs are house dogs, unfortunately.
And he really liked the idea of working dogs. He didn't like the kennel club. He didn't really like the whole commercial business of dog breeding. He really liked, and then he said it many times, and of course he's done little films about living with a dog, where he emphasizes that again. But he hated distortions that came up on people's eccentric views about what a dog should look like. I mean, the worst, isn't it, is that what they've done to sight hounds, like there's a sight hound, the Afghan hound, that turns into a dog walked around by models himself, or even worse, the messing about with poodles, giving them a kind of dog-type topiary. Very intelligent, hunting, shooting, and so on. And said that poodle is now a word for years been used as a term of derogation, saying someone's poodle when you're talking about someone who's an obsequious lackey of some other person. Great waste of a good breed.
Yes. Originally a French water dog, if memory serves me.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Greg. That's a French water dog. And there are some old prints which show the dogs working together on rough suits with one or two other guns. They love the water, love getting themselves covered in all the things that fall off in marshes and probably birds and so on. You know, they're working dogs. But that's not what it is now. Sorry, you're getting me off topic.
I asked a second ago, but I don't think you heard me. Did he always smoke a pipe?
I don't know.
No, did Jack?
Absolutely always, although I do have a photograph somewhere of Jack smoking a cigarette long before. The way these are some of Jack's pipes, which he brought home after he passed away. I think some of
Good old Terry bowl there.
that's one that oh look, it was silvery. It's the one that the soldier could have easily about him in the trenches. And Jack said that this belonged to his grandfather. And this is silver, which of course would have made it rather smarter. But I've let it go off. And you can see it's been well used. And then this is one that he never used that. That was waiting at some point, because as you know, and I haven't got it with me, it's in our other house in Greece, the falcon, which is really his preferred pipe for the last 30 years, and which he's seen with it regularly. He really likes falcon. Easy to clean, cool, all sorts of things. But no, I couldn't tell you how that can be the case, because I'm not myself a pipe smoker. I tried it. Didn't work.
I smoked a pipe for a little while years ago. I gave up the cigarettes. I thought I'll give up a little bit. Went over to the pipe, and I had a lovely cherry pipe, but it was just so much hassles. Light it, do something, come back, relight it, stoke it again. Then it went out. Then you got to clean a bit out. Then you got to top it up again. It took ages. I went back to rolling my cigarettes again.
It's a great prop. You don't find it used now that smoking is being replaced by chemicals. It was something that Harold Wilson was, I think, the last famous person who smoked the pipe. He had a terribly clever way of dealing with interviewers who asked tricky questions, because he'd be smoking his pipe comfortably, and then he'd be asked this question. He'd take his pipe out and do various things with it, and then say, that's a very interesting question. I can't try to begin to imitate his accent, but he'd say, that's a very interesting question. And it's very sensible to have asked me that question. And since you have asked me that question, there's another question that should have preceded it. And I'll answer that one and then I'll come to your question. Meantime, the director is shouting, get this question in, get this question in, because television is very greedy of time. So Wilson used his pipe very effectively. I don't think Jack did. He realized that the trend was going to pipe smoking. So on various programs, you'll see he'll be smoking. And then as the cameras come on, he'll put it down.
It was, from what I've seen of Out of Town, the reruns that are currently being aired, it's almost like, oh, you're back again. Oh, I'll just put me pipe down. It's like that little, like, hand cue thing to go back to the camera.
And I mean, I think I remember all my childhood was just with the smell of Jack's pipe smoking. So I've never been put off by smoking, or I prefer it not if I'm eating somebody smokes a pipe at the table. That wouldn't be very nice. But it's such a strong and definitive smell that I love it, as many, many people do. And it suffused my childhood and my growing up. It was always there. And I always pretend to myself that if I smell this, there'll be a slight aroma of that pipe, even though Jack left us over 50 years. 1994.
I always remember as a child, my dad's father, Fred, he'd sit in his chair, puff his pipe, and I used to race over to blow the match out after he finished soaking it up. Of course, there's quite a few matches of a couple of hours, type thing. Always one Vestas, you got that lovely phosphorus smell, then you get the smell of the wood, then you get the pipe smell, and then that would be my cue to go and blow the match out as a little nicker, you know.
There's some risks of arson, I think. You're smoking when you're fishing, Jack, and you miss out on some things because it puts off some of the wildlife. I don't know if that's the case. But I do know that there were incidents on How. You know, Jack invented How, which was a children's program with work with 3 other people. And but he would, you know, by then pipes were already becoming unacceptable. So he wasn't going to give up his pipe because he wanted to be around. And I think it was good psychologically just to have something in your mouth and to smoke. But then once cameras were on, it would go down and he'd have these pipes and he'd take the pipe out of his mouth as the cameras came on and put it in his pocket. I think he put it out, or he thought he had. And then every now and then so would see some smoke curling up out of his jacket pocket. Send a frantic message down to the studio floor. And the floor manager had to creep over with a jug of water, pour the water into his pocket. I thought this was a semi-invented story, but just the other day somebody told me they were in the studio and they saw that happen. And Jack didn't do anything, you know, he just continued. Absolute consummate professional.
So we all know where Jack stood with most of the countryside. Do you have similar views? Because the interview is with you tonight as well.
Similar views in what respect?
Hunting, shooting, fishing, countryside life, the encroachments of the big city into the countryside. What's your views?
Jack was very careful not to express what might be called political views when he was on air. He would every now and again say that he thought it was unfortunate that certain things were happening. And that's the most he would do. He would say he regretted the extraction of water from chalk aquifers because of the effect that they had on the great trout streams of the south of England. In fact, he had a lot to do privately with consultation and argument with the water authorities. And to some extent, that issue of extracting water for domestic consumption from the chalk aquifers has been resolved in many cases. And a lot of the great chalk streams south of England are pretty healthy. I stand to be corrected on that. I wouldn't be able to check that out, but I've been told that the water companies are much more astute about the way they respond to the endless demand for more water and more water. What else? He wouldn't show, he like trophy pictures. I like a, no, right? He wouldn't ever pose with it or hold it up or anything like that. He disliked the whole business of showing off your kill. Didn't mean he didn't respect the kill and he wasn't proud of a good shot or a good day's bag. But he really didn't like this idea of posing by what you killed. Didn't like that. And some people have said, well, therefore he must have been a bit soft or he didn't like hunting, shooting, and fishing. And he also had different views about hunting. It wasn't so much that he was against hunting, he wasn't, but he felt that the time for hunting had to some extent passed because hunting was something that worked very well when the people who went hunting owned the land they hunted over. But so much land is now owned by business people from the city or by business consortia. And, and the need for intensive farming created by the demand for growing populations of the town for cheap food, encouraged by government to keep the cost of living down, means that it's very difficult to hunt. I'm forgetting about the issue of the fox idea of riding, all things that go with hunting. I'm enjoying enormously with us in my team, getting up in the dark, in the cold, harnessing up, riding 4 miles to the meet, then going out. I used to hunt with the Craven Hunt, based in Newbury. I think they were not a very competent hunt. I don't ever remember a fox being killed, but it was enormously enjoyable. You get covered in mud, soaking wet, and then head home in the dark on a winter's evening, remembering that before you could get indoors, warm up, have a nice meal, have a hot bath, you had to make sure your horse was properly groomed, fed, foddered, and comfortable in the house while you shivered and made sure that it had a good day out as well as you. And I still remember, didn't do it very much, going deer stalking, and on one of the coldest days in the winter in the Cairngorm, or rather the foothills of the Cairngorm, going stalking, and with a very good keeper, with my son, who was then about 15, 16. And we were both checked to make sure we could shoot properly, which we could, against a target. And then we went up into the hills, into the heather, all covered in snow, and spent the whole daylight hours wandering through the heather, into brands, getting soaking wet, getting freezing cold, trying to get ready for a shot. But the keeper wouldn't let any shot be taken unless he could be absolutely sure about it. And I still remember, as the sun was going down, probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and the snow was big, and I was lying on my back in a burn that was frozen. So it wasn't that cold because I got good clothes on. I was lying on it, and the keeper and my son were about 15 yards ahead of us. And I waited, thinking, oh my God, if my son's going to take a shot, I do harm. There was just one shot. That was the only shot in the whole day. Perfect dead. And the keeper who was with us congratulated my son. And he said, what then? And then my son said he was never going to do that again. You know, so he shot his deer. And keeper growled the deer there, all steamy and bloody and all the rest. And then he got an all-terrain vehicle about, a quarter of a mile down the hill, got the deer there, and we got home. And I still remember the sheer pleasure of getting home. A glass of malt whiskey. In those days, my mother's house, the water that was provided was still quite peaty. You ran the water, and it was it looked the same colour as whiskey, but it was just as hot as if it was clear. just getting into that bath, lying back, and every now and again sipping from the whiskey. Because I was, I was only in my 50s then, and really worn out. And that deer went off to, on that particular estate, all the deer were sold to the butchers. I think every part of it was used. But, so yeah, am I answering your question about, I'm a town and country mouse. I feel, Jack taught me to be, he never did manage to teach me to fish. He tried it for a few You had the particular skill and the patience, or just the sheer nous that I think good anglers have, which Jack was. Although I enjoyed watching Jack, I never really got the pleasure out of it that I got out of other country activities. I did a lot of riding and traveled all over the countryside, and the roads were much safer in the 1950s than they are now. So sad. I mean, didn't wear hard hats, didn't wear a yellow tabard and all the things that you really have to wear now to be safe, or even have a notice saying, be careful, horses. And rode all over the place, sometimes on my own, sometimes with my sister, who was a much better rider than I was. And of course, then Jack introduced me to small boats. He wasn't that keen on boats himself. I mean, he enjoyed going out sea fishing, don't get me wrong. But I really took that up. And for my 21st birthday, he bought me a yacht for 240 quid. Still, they weren't. And I sailed that from Lymington to France, across the channel, sailed around. The Canary Islands and then across to Barbados. And Jack announced that on television that we'd fly safely. I got a lovely letter from my tutor in sailing, a wonderful man called Dennis Ray. Sorry, I'm talking about me, you should be talking about Jack. Dennis,
you're here as a guest as well, so.
If you got this letter, you've obviously had a full crossing. All my congratulations. If you don't get this letter, then you haven't done so well. You battled the Atlantic over 5 years. Brave man, had his ship U-boat under him. He was the most gentle and wonderful mentor for me in terms of thinking about sailing seacraft. It was a great adventure that was in the dawn of my life.
Sounds it, Simon.
29 days from the Canary Islands to landfall in Barbados, sailing in the trade wind, blue skies, flying fish, constant wind coming from the east wind, northeast wind, and so on. So you're going as fast as you could. And never, to the reporters who met us at the other end of our voyage, very disappointing. No storms, no tempests, no tornadoes, no sharks, no encounters with whales. No, it was all very easy. Couldn't make a story out of it. And it did take time. I'm not going to discredit myself by saying it was easy. We made it easy by being extremely good at doing what we did.
I have a question about sailing, and I don't understand it. The wind blows you that way. If the wind's still blowing that way, how do you come back?
Well, we didn't come back, of course, because I sailed across. Blows you in the right direction because it comes from more or less behind or on the beam. But there's a great art to going in the other direction. I mean, there's a whole story of how human beings learn to sail against the wind. And of course, with a square rigger, it was extremely difficult thing to do, and you went very slowly. But the Arabs had to go to and fro between Africa and India on the trade routes across the Indian Ocean. So they got a good run or a beam run on the way. I forget which way was which. But then they had to come against the wind to get back. to pick up their cargoes for the return. It might have been the other way around. Anybody watching this who knows about sailing, video. But the point is, they developed the famous rig, the Arab rig, the dhow rig, which had this enormous long leading edge on a beam, and of course with that great leading edge, reef pulled in closely, they could knife into the wind and get close, what's called getting close to the wind, and sail enormously effectively against the prevailing wind. And it was a tremendous achievement. And of course, modern Bermudan rig now matches that. And of course, the technology of sailing into the wind now has been developed with wind tunnels, modern computerized procedure, getting the absolute maximum. I don't know if you've seen any of the America Cup stills. And the technology now is they get up a speed of 50, 60 miles an hour because they come out of the water and they plane, which was something I would have only associated with dinghy sailing. And they rise up out of the water and go incredibly fast. The people who are crewing these things now are trained as they're cyclists. They've got them from the Tour de France. And you get about 6 people sitting in the belly of these ingeniously designed modern yachts who don't see very much because they're pumping away, holding on to handlebars, pumping away like a cyclist. I can't remember. Basically, you just see a few heads sticking out on the deck. And there's one person steering, also head down. Nothing like anything that I know about sailing. I was never a competitive sailor. I always used to think, why would you want to sail around the world and not stop anywhere?
It's like driving and never coming back again, isn't it?
Well, there was, all the world cruises that I like would be to visit loads and loads of places, including islands that you couldn't get to by any scheduled. And that would be the mystery and the excitement of it. Who was it? Yeah, Captain Joshua Slocum wrote a book about sailing around the world. I think by age. And it's the most fascinating book about all the different places, all the weather that he encountered, but all the different places he visited on sailing around the world. I'm trying to remember the name of his boat. He built it himself, American, himself, I think, in the New England Harbor. Come on, Joshua Slocum's boat, Greg, is at Wikipedia. He does the equivalent of lobotomy. You know, with the brain stored here, which remembered these things. Now, I think Joshua Slocum's boat, click, 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 and up it comes, and innumerable other things. And we've just delegated our memory to the internet, which is wonderful in some ways. Any piece of poetry you want, piece of prose, piece of knowledge from almost anywhere. I can sound as if I actually understand things and knowledgeable within seconds because it's out there on the internet. My librarian in my head has come up with it, Spray. It's Joshua Slocum's boat called Spray. And he actually, his last voyage, set out to do another great transatlantic or transoceanic voyage, and he disappeared at sea, which is probably how he'd have preferred it. But I cannot recommend it more. A non-competitive, unbranded, because everybody who takes up any kind of significant yachting achievement now has got to have enormous companies behind them, who all over their sailing clothes, all over the yacht, and so on, because that's the only way you can afford in this day and age to be able to do this sort of thing.
That's one of the reasons why we started the Countrymen Diary magazine years ago, because it was getting so commercial. People were going out shooting and they were putting their wellies on by Dunlop, going to the local shell garage with a Land Rover and filling up with 4-star and using this cartridge and that shotgun. And it got to the point where there wasn't any article or story. It was just name after name after name after name. And we said, we could do better than that. We ought to be like the old school articles, like Archie Coates and all the rest. And that's what we set out to do. And we did 11 and a half years before our servers eventually gave up
And
and
that
died just after lockdown. But
on his t-shirt.
yeah,
Because you haven't got a logo on your t-shirt.
I've got a little tiny one.
Yeah.
On the microphone. It's the company that makes the t-shirts.
But I can tell you that people understood the incredible value of product placement on television. So when Jack came, acquired his celebrity status and was getting viewers in the millions, the number of people who would try to slip in a brand name, the local car dealers were always offering Jack, would you like to try out this particular 4x4? And he had to be extremely careful about it. I mean, he knew all about advertising. So if you look at out of town and later old country, there is an element of product placement. So, for instance, Falcon Pipes. And he wasn't asked by that, but I think Falcon Pipes had produced a Jack Hargreaves edition of the Falcon Pipe. And I think there was a fishing rod that was a Jack Hargreaves sea angling rod. And I think it's got his signature on it, and people now, I've seen it on sale on eBay. And I think there were innumerable attempts because, you get, how much a commercial on television costs. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time Jack came across it was that he had an old ship's lifeboat delivered, which he then converted into a fishing boat. And this lifeboat was delivered by a dealer from Southampton, a boat dealer. And when it arrived, had Stan Sambreo, Jack's cameraman, filming the arrival of this lifeboat on a trailer to be put in front of the house on the forecourt of his workshop. And hanging from the lifeboat was a great big poster saying J.K. Sutton Hampton. You get free advertising.
Yeah.
You might have taken the money off the delivery cost, or Jack might have done a deal somewhere or another that I wouldn't know.
Was his recall of things really that true and off the fly?
You mean when he was on camera?
Yeah, talking about stuff. Pick up an object and start talking for 20 minutes straight.
Words for people who have we say people have got the gift of the gab. And I think there are a number of words in cultures all over the world. But, there's people who have, you might call verbal diarrhea, and they talk too much. I love talking. I love chatter and conversation and all the rest. And you pick me and say, shut up, let someone else get a word in edgewise. Jack was not like that. He could talk about anything under the sun and be entertaining. And I've seen him do it in a pub, seen him doing it in a gathering of other people. And he had a prodigious memory and could talk extempore. Now, that didn't mean that, he didn't use an auto cue. I do remember once when he was doing a particular broadcast, because I used to sit in the control room at some of the broadcasters in Sun's studio and watch with George Egan as the film went out live. And he did on occasion have a little blackboard beside him with a little agenda about things he wanted to remember to talk about. But there was nothing like an auto cue. And the thing about being on, which we don't have to worry about doing a podcast, the thing about radio or television is that you have to stop at the thing because the commercial's got to come on, or the news has got to come on, or the weather forecast, or whatever. And if you go on talking into that, you'll get cut off and makes you look a bit of a dope, or certainly unprofessional. And his ability to start on time, to finish when the location film started to reel on, or when the location film finished, to go into that and then be ready before the titles. And people said he was just incredible to work with his ability to handle these floor manager signals. I mean, of course, there are other people who do it immaculately, but he was superb at that. And so the other thing was that I remember when he first went on telly, George Egan had to slightly console or reduce his anxiety because although he'd done a lot of radio, and he was used to talking in public, and, he'd come out of the war, and he said, my God, I'm going on with this out of town program, and I've got maybe 2 million, 3 million viewers. And that's quite daunting because it's 3 million people are watching you. The only people who are watching me at the moment is Lynn. He's watching the telly anyway. And George, who was a consummate director, George Egan, he used to fly Lysanders into occupied France with SOE. He never said that. No, wouldn't even talk about it. But I learned that from other people who served with him. And he was this calm director. And he said, Jack, you haven't got 3 million people. You've got 3 people in the front room. And one of them's gone out to make a cup of tea, and the other one's reading a paper. Oh, and then probably a dog. And he's not listening either, or she is. And ever since that, I remember Jack said it was a wonderful piece of advice. The television audience was 3 people, 2 of whom aren't actually interested at the moment. That is so different from walking onto the stage of the London Palladium or any other great gathering. And Jack had enormous admiration for people who could walk onto the stage and achieve a sort of intimacy with 3,000, 4,000 people. He said, somebody can walk onto a stage and say, hello. I think that's easy enough to say. And he said, every person in that theatre thinks he's saying or she's saying hello to you. And there are great performers who could do that. And he had enormous admiration. But Jack was a natural for television. I mean, he could speak in public and he could speak to large audiences. But on telly, everybody who told me was that he just started talking and it worked. But then I think I've got a quote of him once, and he said, why do people try so hard on television? Why do they smile? And why do they look at the camera all the time? I don't look at you all the time when I'm having a conversation with you. Why do they have to get it right all the time? You make mistakes. You forget a word. You do this. That's what normal conversation is like. And you say, hang on a moment, hold on, sorry, blah, blah, And that often was the things that some professionals on television, you had to cut all that out. You had to be totally articulate and clear and so on. And so he was a natural in that respect. But he then said, I didn't sleep on Thursday night. Remember, the program went out on Friday evening. I didn't sleep on Thursday night for 28 years. So, of course, it's a bit like Zen Buddhism, isn't it? To be relaxed requires immense concentration.
I've done a few shows and demonstrations and stuff over the years, and I think the most difficult thing when you're talking to a lot of people is who to talk to in the audience. That's why theatre is always dark, because then the person on the stage doesn't have to focus on one individual person. But I've done like cooking demonstrations and stuff, and you've got a whole range of people, and you start wandering your eyes around, like, who's looking at me and who can I make eye contact with? Actually unnerves yourself trying to do it. It's really strange.
Oh, you're right there, Greg, that you don't, but that you do try to make eye contact. It's like in conversation. You know how in conversation you catch people's eyes and you look away, but you don't stare. It's rude to stare. Someone, because I was a university lecturer, said, talk to your audience, but not in a general way. Even if you've got 500 people, and I've done that, find someone and talk to them, and then find someone else and talk to them. And I think all the fine presenters do actually find someone to talk to in the audience. And I don't know whether that means that everybody else thinks you're talking to them. I don't mean that. But what it does mean is it concentrates your mind to think, hold on, I've got to talk to people here. I mustn't just yatter away to a group of people who I'm treating as the audience or them. I need to talk to people because I want to talk to people as individuals. And someone said, yes, that's a great technique, that business of catching people's eye just for a moment. He said, do you know how you do this if you really want to crush a lecturer? Is be that person in the audience who starts nodding and saying, and smiling every time you say something. So as they start talking, they catch the lecturer, poor fellow, or woman, catches the eye of this person. My God, I've got someone who's really with me in the audience. So what you do is you go, right. As the lecturer gets to the main point, and what I want you to know is, and just at that point, the lecturer makes their statement, and you go, I've never done it, I promise, and I've never had it done on me, but I thought it was an interesting thing to watch out for. I mean, good comics are brilliant at this, aren't they? They tell a joke and they realize it's not going down very well. The speed at which they can move on.
Yeah.
You notice it until, if you are interested in technique, because my brother-in-law, sorry, not my brother-in-law, my half-brother, half my family's Greek, and I have a Greek half-brother, who was given, we are getting off Jack a bit here, but he was given as a present by his wife, Kate, a course in stand-up comedy, which led to all sorts of other things. But he had to do a course in stand-up comedy, 12 weeks, and then survive for 3 days in 3 minutes in a London pub. And, I said, what do you want to do? 3 minutes in a London pub with an audience listening to you trying to be funny? Or would you prefer the north face of the Eiger? It's a no-brainer for me. Give me the north face of the Eiger. But George, who's quite canny, as the Greek bit of him, he packed the front stage of the pub with all his family, who were all very variegated, so some Greek, some less Greek. And they were all going, yes! And roaring with laughter, when it wasn't quite as funny as you might have expected. And of course, he went down a bomb, not in the American sense of bombing, but it was very successful. And then he started up an incredible little group called Silver Surfers, which did comedy acts in old people's homes and in hospices. And for about 15 years, and it was immensely successful. They didn't charge very much, and getting all the people at the old people's home to take part in it, as well as the comedians. And I've seen one where they set up a visit by the Queen, and one of the people there was the Queen, and you can imagine all the things that might go wrong. And I love to have been there. It was hilarious. I imagine one of the staff nurses might have got worried that some old people might not have survived, but they'd have died happy.
Sounds a bright ball. So you mentioned university. What were you a lecturer of, Simon?
Well, I was at a place called the School of Public Policy at Birmingham University, and within that, Institute of Local Government Studies. And I was there for 40 years under a wonderful boss, wonderful colleagues, very happy, good work, and paid well because I did consultancy as well. But my expertise in the area was like an unfunny version of Yes Minister. The relationship between politicians who have to be elected and administrators who have to try to carry out and implement what the politicians have promised. German sociologist once who said the greatest strain in modern society is the tension between those people who get elected as politicians and those people who administer government. Because most of the time, the politicians have promised things to be sure of getting elected, and then they get elected, and then the administrators start to show them the books, and you're caught with what you want to do is illegal, what you want to do is technically impossible, what you want to do is financially not viable. And I used to do lots of consultancy work on how to tell a politician that they couldn't have something whilst sounding as if you were telling them they could have it. So you wouldn't think they'd have made a program up called Yes Minister about that. And it really is. I mean, all my life I've been involved in the sort of He is funny, but it's an unfunny version of Yes Minister. Does that make sense? Does that explain?
Yeah, that explains it. I'm just trying to think of something witty to say, but my brain's like, there's nothing witty to go with that. So all these promises for like elections and stuff like that, we know most of them come as like false promises in the end. But is that because of all these things that happen in behind, or is it just there purely as let's raise all this to do it and it's not there going to be there anyway type thing?
Government is as complicated as running a business, or a business is as complicated as government. I mean, the real details of running a business, whether it's a corner shop or a massive corporation, are actually incredibly complex, enormously detailed, as would be if you did the natural history of an ant's nest or any other. You go look at the reality of trying to make things work. It's all bloody complicated, excuse my language. And most of us who vote, I'm voting, I want to keep my job or I want to reduce crime or whatever. You imagine most of the things we vote for in the ballot box are incredibly simplistic ideas and they bear very little relationship to government. But if you're on the hustings as a politician, you've got to win votes. It's no good trying to be someone who says, it's a bit difficult to do, we have to do that, and the money we need to do that isn't available, and we'd have to do this. People are bored already. So, yes, we're going to make the shopping centre safer. We're going to try to do that. And you're constantly having to, what's the word? Lie. But I mean, the really good politician can tell a lie that's got enough truth in it for people to say, well, I can trust this person. I don't want to come up with examples because we don't, but basically, the politician has come in with an extremely simplistic manifesto about what they're going to do. And then they have to come up against the administrative complexity of actually trying to make that happen. And with the extra irony that anything that you try to do is not actually going to be felt for another 4 or 5 years, by which time you probably won't be in post anymore. So you're either benefiting or not benefiting the behavior of your predecessors. And it is a fascinating subject. And I knew about it in local government, but I've also worked with senior civil servants as well. Did a webinar 2 years ago for a number of senior civil servants, sitting in the dining room at our house in Anakrakiana in Greece. So we have another home. We go 50-50 back and forth. Knew enough senior local government officers who'd been promoted to senior positions in the civil service to get a load of background information about what was involved. And I've got, a range of contacts. So I was very well briefed, pulled this together, and it was a very successful event, which sort of ran itself because I've got a feel for that kind of thing.
I do. So you mentioned Greece a couple of times, and you've got half family living there. What's the connection with that then?
Well, this is the amazing thing, because I was brought up by my mother, Barbara, and my stepfather, Jack. And I never called him Dad. I never even called him Father. I called him Jack. And running in the background all the time was my dad. And my mum had divorced my dad, which was a very rare thing to do. It was a war marriage, and they got divorced in 1948. And my dad was devastated because he adored my mother. My mother he wanted her to be his wife because he was going to be a diplomat after the war. He served very honorably and bravely in the war and been very badly wounded. But then he became a diplomat. Actually, he didn't become a diplomat. He became a member of MI6. But MI6 presented as diplomats. So he was he was posted as second secretary to the embassy in Athens.
All right.
And I don't know, even now, the things that he got up to. And I know I've got nephews who are young nephews doing research, trying to find out more about what happened. Because my grandfather was at Bletchley Park, and as was my aunt. So we've got quite a lot of intelligence workers in our family, and you never know what they actually did. And so I never know really what my dad did. But when I was 16, my dad got in touch with my mum and said, would Simon like to come to Greece for the Easter holidays? And my mum said, do you want to go? I said, well, yes, it would be exciting. And my mum said, well, you must ask Jack. And there was always this slight worry I had that Jack might be hurt. Or, you know how children are far more conscious
Yeah.
of their parents, and sometimes parents know. And I went to Jack and said, Johnny, because I didn't even call him I didn't say my dad has. I called him, because he was Johnny Baddeley, John Baddeley. Johnny's asked me, you see the diplomacy, has asked me to come to Greece. And Jack's first reaction was, you're doing your A-level, you're doing your O-level, O-level, 16, yeah. I think you're crazy. And I remember, and this is still in my heart to this day, I said to Jack, are you sure that's the reason why you reacted as you have? I was terrified. And Jack said, you can't talk to me like that. And he said, oh, go if you want to. But make sure you work on your exams. And I realized that it was a bit painful for Jack because he'd been so much my parent and so much a part of my life. And here I was going off for this incredible treat to Greece, see my dad, and so on. I don't know. I mean, he never said anything more about it. I went off to Greece, 4 days on the Samplon Orient Express, diverging at Venice to go on to Athens. Fantastic adventures. And when I arrived in Greece, there was all the Greek members of the family. Not my dad. He was, I think, at work. And they were all, oh, Simon, you are so handsome. You are so tall. And they were kissing me and hugging me. And I thought it was horrible. I didn't like that. We were much more staid. When we sat down at table with Jack, we didn't drink and so on. Although Jack, much later, was perfectly able to have brandy and wine and so on. But we had a fairly staid, more sort of quiet background. And suddenly there were all these noisy, bloody Greeks all around me. Leaving lipstick on my face, And, well, I was there for 2 weeks. And the worst thing could have possibly happened, but my mother said, I think you're going to change. And I did. I went to Greek Easter. I went to parties with dancing, music, and all this affection that I was given all the time, constantly being flattered. And it was like the rod came out of me, as it were, all the stiff upper lip that you're taught so strongly. The stiff upper lip, I don't know if you know it, but it's our generation and older. We're taught stiff upper lip and not showing your feelings and all the rest. And my wife is much more like that. If I get a bit weepy about a piece of music, I say, God, stop it, don't be so silly. And she's so totally stoked she's listening to this. And she's much more English than I am. And I've got no Greek blood, but I've got a bit of the Greek temperament from that side of the family. I adore the Greek neighbours that we've got, and I love it when and everything about the place, which has got plenty of things you can criticise about it, just as you can about our own country. So I love England. I'm proud to be in. But I'm also proud of my links with Greece. Since then, I've travelled to Greece on many occasions. And 15 years ago, we had the occasion to buy a property in Greece. And we now have a home in a small village in the centre of Corfu called Anokrakiana, with a view to die for of the mountains of mainland Greece across the sea, beautiful strip of blue sea, olive groves as far as the eye can see, lemon trees, orange tree, middle of the village. And, I still haven't worked out, we sort of joke about this, do I want to die in Greece or die in England?
How's Greece doing with the money out there now? Because I know it went a bit pants up from, didn't it?
Yeah, but we were hardly affected, and we have residency status now. But you certainly wouldn't want to go to Greece to save money because the prices in Corfu in the supermarkets, they're higher in some places than they are in England. Petrol's very expensive, and Greece as a country, if you're a young man or a young woman and you want to have a professional career, you probably have to leave Greece and go to some country in the rest of Europe or to Canada or America. Because the economy is an economy that's enormously based on tourism. And it all goes quiet, which is very nice. But people who stay on in Greece are living on very small wages. After the political crisis, economic crisis in 2008, people found their pensions were cut by a third. All sorts of bad things happen, although you wouldn't notice it, because if you go to Corfu town, which is the city that is part of the island where we live, it's absolutely, even before when the tourists aren't there, loads of people. They can make a latte or a cold coffee last for all morning while they're talking to their friends. So it's full of happy conversation, talk, old men in little groups, young people talking to each other, showing off their bodies, flirting and so on. And the atmosphere is wonderful. And you wouldn't believe that underneath it there is this economic crisis.
I know when I went to Italy with the college, I think that was about 93, it was just as the money was starting to go funny out there. Here I think it was like £5 for 20 cigarettes, £2.50 for a pint. Out there, a cup of coffee was like 3 million lira. And it's like, I was trying to get my head around this huge distorted figure for absolutely nothing. But that's the way their economy ran. And the government basically ran it almost into the ground. And I know there was a young black man I bumped into selling dodgy audio cassettes. It was like Italy's answer to the boy, oh, I need to go home, see my father, he is poorly, you buy these, And it was something like 30,000 lira for a pirated cassette tape. It's like, I worked out it's like £3.50 or something stupid, but it's like, yeah, go on, mate, I'll stick in my personal stereo and listen to it type thing. But it was like stupid amount of money for everyday stuff out there. But that's the way the economy got to, and it shouldn't have got that way, but it did. But you think Italy, it's famous and it's rich, and only certain parts of it is rich. Most of it's working class people. And even like we went to a bakery in Florence that sold a tray of pizza. So you got your big black baker's trays. I suppose there was like 10 cuts that way, one cut down the middle, and then they were cutting it in triangles as well. And it was like 4,500, 5,000 lira for a slice, which is like 50, 60 pence, whatever it was. But fabulous pizza, but it's like, it's not worth the money. It was printed on nothing. Really, really strange situation. Then come back here and they put the price up for everything for a budget. It's like, oh my days.
And it's very difficult to know what it is with hard times, because I was born in 1942 and I bore my life with this, but probably lived in the most secure and comfortable and prosperous era that has ever existed in the history of the world. Things are much more difficult for my children and for my grandchildren. I believe their prospects are not so good. Yes, they've got, in our case, the support of their grandparents or their parents. But I think this generation is got far rougher prospects, far more difficult choices to make. When I got my job at the university, I had a probationary period that lasted 18 months. I'd have had to have killed a small puppy or and then I was at the university for 40 years, and it was a completely set job. Yes, I did well at the job, and I was respected and so on. But I had tenure, and You don't get that at university now.
No.
Very few jobs that are a job for life. You have to make your own life. And that's what's interesting about Jack. Jack was never in a long-term job in a bureaucracy like as I was, like a university or a big corporation. He said he only did a job interview once in his life. He was always headhunted, but this is the kind of talent that he had. Because in his childhood, he had two brothers, and his father, he couldn't get on with him at all, but his father was very insistent that his children went into the medicine. Two of them did. His older brother and younger brother did, and they had very successful careers. Jack didn't want to do that. He didn't get on with his grandfather. You know, it's all in Jack's biography with his father. And so he compromised and said, all right, I'll do a medical thing. I'll go on a veterinary course on the university, one of the most elite veterinary courses, the one at London University. And he specialized in horse veterinary work, I believe. And about a year or maybe 2 years into his course, his father had to come and say, I can't afford to pay your university. And Jack said it was awful because although he couldn't get on with his father, he hated to see the man humiliated. Because, you know, you have to say to your son, I can't afford to give you the education in insisting that you get. And so Jack left that university course, never qualified as a vet, learned enough about veterinary course to obviously give him a lot of background knowledge for some of the things he talked about years later in his TV program, and got a job in the heart of London with an advertising company doing copy for Spratt's dog food. And he was very good with words, as we know. You know, he could write and speak so articulately. And of course, he'd come out of the war where he'd been doing propaganda work. So that gift, and he'd done radio before the war, so he already had that gift, but he was having to live by his wits. And then he went from Spratt's dog food copywriting into some very big advertising agency. I think it was Coleman, Prentice and Varley, one of the biggest advertising agencies. And started to get a very satisfactory salary, which is where he met my mum, who worked for him as a secretary. She previously worked for Vogue for nothing, where, you know, you got a job with Vogue as a sort of intern and the honor of working for Vogue. You know, she was fairly well off.
Yeah.
And she actually was a Vogue war correspondent, which I'm rather proud of. She's got the decals, you know, as war correspondent. And that's another story because it's fascinating. But Jack learned all about the whole persuasion business, the way advertising works. And of course, he brought to advertising his knowledge that he developed and the skills he developed doing propaganda during the war. So he knew about communication, and he used to explain to me so much about the advertising industry and loads of little anecdotes and stories about how persuadable people are, how deceivable people are, how people can be led by the nose. There was one example he gave me was about paint, in which synthetic paints were coming in to replace the old, rather unmanageable paints. You actually had to be a proper decorator to know how to handle the old paints. When the DIY movement, it came in the 50s, 60s, and he was in this advertising thing, and people said, the trouble with this paint is it's synthetic. It's not genuine. People aren't going to like that. And Jack said, you've got to be joking. When you sell this paint, you say, white indoor paint, and it's synthetic, splashed across the thing. You know, so the word synthetic actually registers with people, you know, they tested it out, obviously, with consumer groups and so on. Oh, it's synthetic. I'll have that. You know, whereas other times, you know, we're all into craft beer, cottage made such and such. You know, that's all the trend now, is greening things up and making them artisan pizza and so on. And I said, I'm glad I'm learning about this, Jack, you know, because I won't be. He said, don't ever think advertising doesn't affect all of us. He said, I'm affected by advertising. You're affected by it. But just because you know how it works, don't think you don't know that you can't be scammed. And I thought that was really good. It wasn't a sort of, well, I'm superior. I know how this works. He knows that was part of the human condition. That we like to have things sold to us. We enjoy the whole process. And what times we live in now when we don't know what to believe half the time from anybody, anytime. Ever since the internet came, you've got AI, which allows you or me to imitate the voice of any politician or actor in the world. So you can do a spoof call from Donald Trump or Obama or Starmer or you name it. And AI will do this. It's just astonishing. I've just had a little article that I've written for Talking Pictures TV, which is showing out of town at the moment. Give them a plug. Sarah and Noel Cronin with Talking Pictures TV are airing out of town programs. I've licensed them to do that. But what was I saying? I've lost my thread now. It's getting so fascinating.
AI and voices.
They said, could I have an article about how you recovered Jack's films and archives, which has been a great thing I've been doing with lots of other people over the last 15 years. A lot of help from Lynn and absolutely invaluable. And I said, could you write me a 1,000-word article about how you recovered the thing and what was your relationship with Jack? Well, in the last 20 minutes that we've been talking, I've given you only a smidgen of my relationship with Jack or about him. And you imagine trying to get this into 1,000 words. So anyway, I wrote something I thought was quite good. 3,500 words. I got in touch with my daughter because I don't understand ChatGPT. I understand it, but I can't make it work on my computer. So the same difficulty we had with this app of having this conversation. She sent it back condensed into 1,400 words, and it was brilliant. And it was all done in about 10 seconds. I thought, God, no wonder, who is the bloke in the wheelchair who said, watch out for artificial intelligence?
Was it Stephen Hawking?
He said, this is absolutely wonderful. It's going to really help the human race. It could end the human race. And it is fantastic. And I'm to get hold of this, one of these AI uses, whether it's Momentum or ChatGPT or whatever, and this is only just started. At the moment, artificial intelligence hasn't got sense of humour much yet. It doesn't really make good jokes. But by God, it did a bloody good précis of this article that I wrote. So I've sent that off. I hope that you'll think it's good if you see it. But I've got a friend who's a pub about 4 or 5 times a year in a pub and put the world to rights. 3 of us. One of them's so left wing he got chucked out of the Labour Party. That's probably not difficult. He said, come to revolution time, it's up against the wall for you, but I'll give you a cigarette. We're really good friends. We have quite a bit of it. And then another friend. I'm losing. I think we're going to have to end this because I'm losing my train again. Was he talking about AI or? Oh yeah, he said I've been trying AI, and I've been asking the AI, do you think I'm human or not? And the AI said, yes, of course you're human because you're giving me things to work on. And he said, how would you know that I wasn't another algorithm-based program that is talking to you? And he said it was very interesting because it went this do not compute, cannot compute. He said, I think I floored it because it didn't know how to answer. And, it's like, you get these things in the house. Have you got one of these things that you have in the house that the lights come on and you say, hey, Google, can you, what are they called, assistant?
No, because I'm Cornish and it doesn't bloody understand me.
Home assistant, because you talk about or something, or you talk about some book that you read, or you talk about a football team that you're keen on. And the next bloody thing is all these things are appearing on Amazon. We thought you might be interested in this. The bloody thing's been overhearing us and fed it into, And so I said, are you listening to what we're talking about? I do not understand the question. I say, you bloody hell. And we got one of these, Lynn and I got one of these for a Christmas present 2 years ago. And we used it for a bit. It's quite useful. You say, can you give me a warning in 20 minutes because we're cooking something? Let me know when to take it off the boil. Or, when is the date of the next such and such? Or what's the weather in? Can we put another log on? Can you put a log on fire? And I thought this was quite useful until on a number of occasions, the light switch showed it had turned itself on, came on without asking. I got rid of it. I don't want that. My son is he lives in Istanbul and works there, but he's pretty paranoid. He puts a thing over the camera on his computer. He says, I don't want anything on the internet. I don't want this, and he only uses encrypted conversations. I sometimes wonder if he succeeded my dad into MI6, but I don't think so. And I said, do you think somebody's out to get you? This is about 4 years ago. I said this because I thought he was so, prudish about any kind of sharing because it doesn't worry me too much. And he said, yeah, I don't like the fact that so much of my data is being completely routinely harvested. So it's just going into a vast store and being processed. And I don't want that. Outside that harvesting process, I don't know if you've come across the concept of surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism. The whole purpose of the social web groups is to shepherd users into echo chambers, or what are called echo chambers or filter bubbles, where basically you join a social web group and they encourage you to only be friendly with people who you're friendly with, and you unfriend people whose views you don't agree with. And so they gradually they shepherd you into homogenous groups, which then get sold on the data market.
Yeah.
And they're very profitable because, if I was running a business and I'd say I'm trying to sell a particular kind of, this comes up, I'd say, can you tell me, is there a market for women who smoke pipes and what we might do to adjust the pipe? What's the brands that they really like? And, for so many £1,000s, I could get a market of 1 billion people from whom will be selected those people who might be interested in such a product. It's extremely valuable and worthwhile information to have. And anybody make use of that. And so the reason people, Facebook's free, TikTok's free, it's free. It's not bloody free. You're the, on these things.
It's as simple as Google, what chicken can I make tonight? Facebook, half an hour later, here's some chicken recipes we found. A week later, do you remember seeing some chicken recipes? No, I don't.
I know. You have to be very careful what buttons you press. I find I spent 400 quid. Luckily, it's all been paid back because I bought a rail ticket and then pressed some button which said, did you want to have regular information about such and such? But the button was a selling program. What was it called? But I didn't notice that there were these regular payments coming out of my bank account. I should have picked it up, and I didn't. And I went and said, I haven't bought anything on this. What's this about? I said, did you use a train line website to buy a train ticket? And I went back because the computer remembers all that. Yeah, I had. It was a completely legitimate service. And they paid me back all the money that I'd spent on them through signing up for a direct edit. But I do think you have to be awfully careful. What? It's not a direct debit, Lynn said. That's just very clever. It doesn't come up under your direct debit. It's a recurring payment. Clever.
Yeah. I used an app earlier, so I didn't have to load into YouTube and have an advert just to get the Out of Town theme tune earlier. But on the website was 3 buttons that said download, download, download. And the actual button I needed was at the bottom of the page from the site, but those were advertisers' buttons. And this is where they get you. And I hate to say it, the older generation we've seen how much hassle you had tonight to try and hook up with me with this. This is the third hack we've tried tonight. The older generation can't see all these things. They just look all the same on the internet. And even my generation is getting beyond a joke with it now.
That's right.
And it's stupid.
Lines of communication with children or with young people. They will take your hand and help you. So, you know, my children are very helpful in terms of wising me up about things. And it does help that I had with Jack, because Jack predicted so much of this. You know, if Jack was still around, he would now be doing a Joe Rogan type thing where he'd be podcasting from a Bijou studio next to his home in Dorset to a global audience. Media, what's called the mainstream media, the legacy media, they're like the dinosaurs with all the small furry mammals maneuvering them over and over again. Joe Rogan, just to give an example, it's like one particular person, but there are people. There's a person on Out of Town with Jack Hargreaves, the Facebook page that I run, which has got 13,000 members. Me and a number of very good other administrators. I think you're one of the administrators, aren't you, Greg?
I am indeed.
You can get rid of me, can you? I think there's a thing that stops you actually.
Yeah. You're admin, we're moderators.
I trust you. It's absolutely wonderful. But the thing, you can get an interview on one of these podcasts like we've had. But, Joe Rogan probably helped Trump to win this election because he did a 3-hour interview with Trump on his show, which got how many? 13 million hits. And Kamala Harris was offered the same opportunity. And I really wonder if her advisors said it would be a bit risky for her to do that. And it wasn't like a probing interview. Joe Rogan just had a chat like you and I are having a chat. And it was very entertaining, quite fascinating just to listen to them talking away. Because Rogan is a consummate entertainer. He's got that complete relaxed gift. Well, you're doing pretty well. And Trump suddenly showed a side of himself which is not the sort of stuff you see when he's on the podium. And I'm sure that must have helped in terms of people who might have been hovering about how they'd vote. I'm not going to make a comment one way or the other about the US election, but it is fascinating how what Jack said is that what he said, narrowcasting will completely take over from broadcasting. Broadcasting, if you get less than 1 million viewers, you're in dead trouble. You can't.
Yeah.
Podcasting, you can have a podcast with 10 viewers. As long as you can afford to have. Well, Tony Gosling interviewed me last year. He does radio. He's a radio professional. He was on the phone to me actually just a couple of hours ago. He did an interview with me. It's had 20,000 views. And I did another interview with a chap called Michael Livesey up in his studio in Liverpool, just talking about Jack and about programs. And that's had a similar number of views. Now, that's a tiny number of views compared to what the famous podcast. We've got one podcaster called Scott Reed. Have you come across him on Out of Time with Jack Hargreaves?
I'm a friend of Scott.
Wonderful bloke. And he's, you know him, he does butchery, he does a podcast, of course, he's a published author, he's a cook, and he does in fantastic food preparation. And he does something like squirrels from tree to plate in 3 goes. And it's technically brilliant, from going out with a gun to shoot the squirrel, and then skinning it and gutting it and doing all the other things, to making a very nice looking dish. And beautifully explained, and I think he's got viewers in the millions. And I think you know him personally, do you?
Yes, he used to write for the Diary as his channel starting. To help him, he used to write articles. Basically, he would do a video it was almost monthly back in those days, but he would write like a little blurb to go with it, and we would embed that on his thing. And then YouTube brought out this thing, you probably know it, where with a channel, you can put in like an index page. for a website, and that'll add a new video to your site every time they upload. And it got to the point where he had to stop writing for us because he was doing videos almost every like twice a week. And it went from like 10 or 15 videos to like 30 or 40 in like a month or so. And it just took off for him. And yeah, I've known Scott for 14 years now, 15 years.
Love to meet him, and if you can arrange it, I wondered if he might, for all his ease on the screen, he's a natural. He might actually be quite shy. It's all right, I'm not asking you to talk about him, but I mean, I'd love to meet him. But you see,
he's in the same county as you. He's in the same county.
That's right. He's just down south of Worcester, isn't he? What's the first thing on him? I'd love to. But I mean, the thing about Scott is that he makes it all look so easy.
Yeah.
Whether he's doing the cooking or whether he's doing the talking, and he's got the blarney. He's got a real line in conversations and so on, and he can write well and he can speak well, and he's entertaining. Even if you couldn't bear to eat a pork pie or a pheasant canapé or whatever, he's entertaining. Just watching him is riveting.
Yeah, I remember, I suppose about 8 years ago now, Simon, someone commented, look at those horrible tattoos. Of course, Scott's got all the ace of diamonds and all those rocker tattoos and stuff down his knuckles. And Scott completely ignored him. Everyone else, there's about 500 people, jumped on this poor bloke about having tattoos. But I don't know how this poor bloke would have survived. I think he must have crawled under the rock type thing. But Scott completely ignored him and carried on. But 500 people jumped on this guy.
Well, that's what it means, when you've got an audience of 1 million, and
Yeah.
And I suspect he's brought peace of mind to people in all sorts of places because he's just got that personal touch.
And along with being a butcher, he's also a qualified fishmonger, and he qualified back in the days when butchery learned fishmongery as well.
Yeah, that's right. But I think I love it. The way he can go out into the country and catch something to cook and then cook it out there and cut up some. And you go, God, digitize that and post it to me. I sort of like in Scarship Edge. Something. So I have an enormous affection for him. I think he's wonderful. And yes, I haven't got a tattoo, but I had occasion to admire other people's because it's a great art.
Now, on about digitizing things, how did you manage to get the Out of Town and Old Country series? Seeing a lot of it was almost like, was it live recorded?
It's stop me if I'm getting into too much detail because it's I can become quite a nerd on this subject. The thing is that Jack's programs were very difficult to preserve until 1980-81 when they stopped using quad tapes and actually recorded TV as they do now, take it for granted. But they didn't record. You can record this conversation just by pressing a button. But Stan filmed with 2-minute reels of films which were turned into reverse negative. So you got these bits of reels of, you had to do all that filming. Imagine doing outside broadcasting, trying to catch a fish rising or a bird being shot and falling out of the sky or any one of innumerable things with 2 minutes of film. It went up to 4 minutes later with this hefty great Ariflex camera. And he didn't like tripods either. So you always knew Stan was filming because there'd always be a slight movement there, but he was constant. So you got this location film. And then that location film was edited at Southern and it was mute. Dave Knowles, who you may have come across because he does Old Country, and he was a producer of Old Country or part of it, and lovely bloke. And he was a sound engineer, and he added library sounds to Jack's mute film. So the sounds were added afterwards, and the film was cut up, much more complicated than it is now. And Jack aimed to film 1-to-1, and particularly with advertising, they film 1,000 to 1. The rest ends up on the cutting room floor. And And even a lot of programs now with things that edit 50 to 1, 100 to 1, 10 to 1. Jack did almost damn near 1 to 1, just cutting out one or two little tiny things. Dave then adds the sound effects. Was an absolute professional perfectionist about adding sounds. You know, like there's a different sound for a chub coming out of the water compared to a dace or a trout. Or there's a different sound of different kinds of wind in different trees. And Jack said effectively, fuck that, Dave. Just put in the simplest versions of the sound. A bit of white sound. If you want wind, have a little bit of wind. And if you want a splash, have a splash. The viewers will imagine that. And I must say, when I first saw Jack's program, before I became familiar with all this, I thought he got a sound team. And it was only later that I remembered that he'd had a trouble with the trade unions insisting on not having a sound team in the field because he wanted just to stand there, not to disturb things. So even George Egan, his wonderful director, would sit in the car some way away or not turn up at all for location films. So it was just Jack and Stan. So it was a shoestring, very cheap. Trade unions at Southern Television didn't like it, but he persuaded them and negotiated. He didn't know what sort of deal was made. So then you get the location film, and then you go to the studio. The location film is played on a monitor in front of Jack while he's sitting in his shed, inverted commas shed. Off it goes live. It was always live until much later on, when he was doing Old Country, where they filmed it beforehand. But all of a sudden, I think all the out of towns were live. And Jack liked live because it was dangerous. You know, you could say dreadful things. He never did, of course. But, you know, I mean, if you watched in the old days of television, when suddenly people dried up because they were going live and there was suddenly this terrifying look on their face because it was going out to millions of people and they dried. Bad as being on, worse than doing it in the theatre in a way, because you had so many more million people watching. And I think it's still now people are quite frightened about live television because there's so many opportunities for making mistakes. And apart from making yourself look like a fool, there's the regulator to take into account if you say something wrong and you can get fired for saying something incorrect. Anyway, things were kinder in those days, I suppose. What happened was that the only reason that we've got any of the old out-of-town programs on DVDs now or on YouTube is because ITV, the regulator, insisted that all programs that went out were recorded on quarter-inch reel-to-reel sound tape.
All right.
When I collected all these cans of film from the Southwest Television Archive, that's another story. I traced these films with help from valuable friends. Brought the film back. It was this reverse negative film. And then along with it came these sound tapes in boxes, quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape. Now, to get that onto a DVD, you had to digitize the sound tape, digitize the film, and then you had to synchronize the film and the tape. Every hammer blow, every shot, you can imagine. And it was expensive. It required people with considerable skill. It could be done on a thing called a Steenbeck machine. And then there are other machines that will do that now. And I've had the privilege of meeting some of the nerds. Nerd will never be a dirty word for me. There are people who are perfectionists when it comes to this business of taking this intractable raw material of reverse negative film and sound tape, and then wrapping them all together. The trouble is, what do you do with Jack's introductions in the studio, which have completely vanished? You've got the sound. Hello, today I'm going to show you this. We're going to go and look at some sheepdogs, and etc., etc. Just the sound. Now, you can't make that into a commercial DVD because I've tried. They put a few stills of Jack, maybe with some subtext and so on. it's not going to work. You need to have Jack in his studio. So the only studio films that we've got are the episodes that were made 1980, 81 when they stopped using quad tapes and recorded in the studio. All the other stuff is lost. It still exists, except that Tim, well, let me come to, if I forget my friend, say you mentioned Tim, right? And then 1986, Jack, realizing the way things were going, got hold of a lot of this old location film. And with a team that had been used for Old Country, which was 1981, 1984, that team in a schoolhouse near Stoke in Hampshire put together Old Country programs, right? And then that same team went to Jack's house in Dorset, took this old film and put it together, and he would sit in his real shed, not his studio shed, and give introductions. And that was done in 1986. It wasn't even on Southern television. And for 30 years, that was the only out-of-town material that was available commercially. And then I couldn't get hold of it because Jack had been funded to make those 1986 films by Endemol, or an agent of Endemol called Southern Star. There, they should get more. And they claimed to own all of Jack Hargreaves' films because of their role in making those films, which were the only ones available. And I kept writing to Endemol, saying, I'm a poor old bloke and I love my stepfather. Could you let me have these? And finally, the chief executive of Endemol said, all right, you can have them, 10,000 quid. If you even start to bargain, forget it. So I bought the rights in those for 10,000. But I'm not making a lot of money out of my stepfather, but that doesn't worry me. But, I get royalties, obviously. But, I mean, to get the rights has been quite a battle. So I got those, and then I got the rights in Old Country. And that also was a bit of a legal issue as well. It's valuable material, this. There are other people who have a claim on it, or feel they have a claim. So now all of Jack's out-of-town programs, the stuff we've reproduced and the stuff that we've still got in store, belongs to me. And it can be inherited by our family.
So how many episodes do you think have actually been lost, never to be seen again?
I mentioned Tim. Tim Beddoes says we don't want to waste these, but all of Jack's studio musings is all right when the location film's on, because we can use the tape of him talking over the location film, because that was recorded. But we can't use a blank in the studio of him talking. And we discussed about doing a clone of Jack, sort of making his, they've done these things where it's sort of like Zombie, where you dub his voice onto someone with their mouth moving. No good. It doesn't work. Tim Beddoes, who's produced the largest repertoire of Jack's broadcasts on DVDs, box set, who died in 2022, so sad, far too early, said, Simon, the only person who can do it is you. I said, I get it. I can't stand the idea of people saying, oh, this bloody bloke came on and introduced the bloke we want to watch. It's like I hate these classical films where you're going to be able to see Casablanca or The Third Man, and then some smart aleck critic comes on and says, the reason I like this wonderful film about Casablanca, and it talks for 10 minutes about bloody Casablanca. And I say, I want to just get Casablanca going, or Third Man. And Tim said it won't be like that. One, you've got a lot of the mannerisms of your stepfather. Two, including the way you talk. And two, he is your stepfather and you have a unique relationship with him. And you've been living with these films all your life. So there's no one who can actually do this. So if you want to do it, do it. If you don't want to do it, then the stuff will say. So we did these 3 DVDs now. We got 16 episodes revived, in which I do the introductions, directed by a wonderful chap called Paul Benessis. who's a filmmaker, director, and understands how to take 4:3 film, which is what Jack's film is, 4:3, modern film by 9. And you hardly notice the transition from the 4:3, from the 16.9, where I'm talking, from my allotment in Handsworth. And of course, I didn't speak for 15 minutes. At the most, I spoke for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, just to make links, or to say, hello, I'm Simon Baddeley, Jack Hargreaves' stepson. The reason you're seeing me and not Jack is because all the interactions that he made said. So I'm sitting in my shed, saying a little bit about the film you're going to see, which Jack will talk to you about. And it seems to have worked. I spent the best part of 18 months rehearsing it, whereas Jack could have done it just like that. Because to talk just naturally in the way that, say, Scott Reed or Joe Rogan, or you for that matter, that is a talent that comes, I think you're born with it somewhere.
Did you think about doing like an audiobook? I know it sounds a bit strange, but even just something like that with Jack's voice playing, I would quite happily buy an audiobook.
People have said that, and Jack did do 4 long play records, and we've got on one of the DVDs that Tim Beddoes' company Network made. It's called Know Your Fish, Know Your Pony, Know Your Dog, and Countryside Walking, and they're both sort of half-hour sound tapes, and they're on the DVD, but just sound. And he did actually make long play records. I got a couple upstairs. That was party, and he'd be just sitting in his car making those in the way that he could, and turned into LPs. And you're quite right. The trouble about taking the sound tapes that we've got is Jack says things like, I wonder if you've ever seen anything like this. And we don't know. I mean, we can guess, or, have a look at this, he'll say, and what do you think that is? It looks a bit like this. So you put that on a sound tape. I mean, there are going to be people who say, I couldn't care less. I just like hearing his voice. I have a lovely friend in Anacrakiana who's from the Wirral, but lives in Greece now, works there. And he said, I loved your stepfather. When I'm feeling really cracked out, had a hard day, been working really hard, I go and put on Jack and then I can slip off to sleep. And then he said, hold on, that doesn't sound right. Not that. No, it's just that when he's talking, everything's all right in the world.
You've heard me say I've got a toddler. He's gone bed now. But I've only got to stick, now they're on Talking Pictures, stick on the Virgin box, stick on Talking Pictures, and of course you fast forward it up until the point. Click play just as the horses are coming up over the field. The music starts, and he'll stop whatever he's doing, and he just comes sit next to me like this, and he's waiting. And I don't know whether it's Jack's voice, Jack's mannerism, or whether he actually enjoys watching the show. He's not even 3 till April, but he'll stop what he's doing and come and sit next to me and watch an episode of Jack. It's crazy to think, nearly 70 years on for some of the episodes, this toddler is quite happy to stop his world and sit next to the old man and watch a program like this.
It's lovely to hear you say that, because, when I lived with Jack, growing up from age 6 onwards, when Jack was around, everything sort of seemed all right. I don't know how to put it this way, because the only time he was ever angry with me, very seldom, but he'd get angry with me because I misused his tools. I go into the workshop, he would be snap at me. The only time that Jack ever really did something was I was bullying my sister. And he'd warned me about this, and I must have done it a 3rd time. She was about 18 months younger than me. She's still alive, we can see. And he came into my bedroom at our home, and he said, have you been bullying your sister again? And I said, well, she was doing this. And he went like that. Didn't hit me hard. It was just the shock that you don't hit a woman. And that's what your sister is now. You might have scrambled about and wrestled with each other when you were younger. Now she's a young woman and you do not hit her. However she might provoke it, because I was very good at provoking at this moment, and all the women in my family, they know You know how some women think that if they've been hit by a man or something's happened, oh, I must have annoyed him, I must have done something. You know, all the things police have to deal with about women who've been domestically abused. And they just said, you know, a man doesn't hit a woman. End of. And that's the only time you could say he disciplined me. He would send me out of the room every now, but never, you know, in any bad way at all. When he had these migraines, which he used to have for about 3 days, probably about 3 times a year, he'd had these terrible migraines. Later on, he learned it was about a yeast diet. Much later, when he was in his 70s, the doctor said, stop having a yeast diet. It all stopped. But I mean, for 70 years, he'd suffered from these migraines, and they must have been agonizing. So I would come down one morning, say, when we were at home, and Mum would say, be a bit quiet today, Jax. And he would just stay in his bed, lying, trying to sleep. And I remember the feeling of sort of tension because Jack wasn't around anymore and wasn't that he was in charge.
Hi folks, Great Countryman's Diary. Unfortunately, me and Simon chatted so much that we actually ran out of tape. Basically the batteries died my end. Very, very sorry. Maybe Simon will come back for a part 2, who knows, hopefully. But thoroughly enjoyable interview. Lovely man, very, very knowledgeable. And very sorry it ended, but it was nearly 2 hours at that point. My batteries just gave up. But many thanks for watching.